She beat the world number 2, then walked past every camera and went straight to her mom, and the whole world broke down crying. I have watched a lot of sports moments in my life. Buzzer beaters, championship collapses, comebacks that had no business happening, athletes dropping to their knees on fields and courts and tracks all over the world. And most of the time, even when the moment is genuinely great, you feel it for a few seconds, and then it fades. It joins the long catalog of things that were impressive and then became memory. But every once in a while, something happens that does not pass, something that lodges itself somewhere under your ribs and stays there. That is what happened in Paris on May 25, 2026. A 20-year-old from the Philippines made history on one of the most iconic tennis courts on the planet and then did something in the aftermath that nobody in that stadium was ready for. And what followed has now been watched over 30 million times. If you think you already know the story because you saw the clip, I promise you, you do not. Not the full version, not the part that makes the clip make sense. So stay with me, because this one is absolutely worth telling properly. Welcome back to Champions Tennis Addicts, the channel where we bring you every chapter of the ALEXANDRA EALA story, every emotion, every milestone, and every moment that reminds us exactly why sports matter. And today, we are talking about the moment that broke the internet, melted hearts on every continent, and changed the way the entire world sees a 20-year-old girl from Quezon City. This is the story of Court Suzanne Lenglen, the first round of the 2026 French Open, and the walk across a tennis court that 30 million people cannot stop watching. Court Suzanne Lenglen. First round of the French Open, ALEXANDRA EALA across the net from world number 2 Elena Rybakina, a player who had spent the better part of 2 years systematically dismantling every opponent who stood in front of her. The kind of player that when your name gets drawn against hers in round 1 of a Grand Slam, most people in the tennis world quietly assume your tournament is already finished before it begins. For a player making only her second main draw appearance at Roland Garros, facing a top 2 ranked opponent on clay in front of a packed stadium, carrying the hopes and the love and the prayers of an entire nation on her shoulders, the realistic expectation from the outside world was survive with dignity and start preparing for next year. ALEXANDRA EALA did not get that memo. 6-4, 6-3, 1 hour and 47 minutes. Straight sets. And not a scrappy, lucky, hang on and hope the other player makes errors kind of win either. A controlled, composed, technically sharp performance against one of the best players in the world on the most unforgiving surface in professional tennis, in the biggest match of her career. When the final point landed, the eruption from the stands was immediate, overwhelming, and unlike anything Roland Garros had heard in years. Philippine flags in every section of that stadium, the chant of her name so loud and so sustained that you could feel it even through a phone screen halfway around the world. Alex raised her racket and turned to acknowledge the crowd. For a moment, she was fully inside the joy of it, waving, laughing, soaking in something she had spent her entire life working toward. And then she stopped. You can see the exact moment it happens if you watch the footage carefully. Her eyes moved left. They found one face in the front row of the player's box, a woman sitting with her hands pressed together, shoulders shaking, tears already streaming before Alex had even begun to move. And something in Alex's entire posture changed. The racket came down. The wide smile softened into something quieter and more complicated, and she started walking. Not toward the media center, not toward the sideline to gather her things, straight to her mother. Before we go one step further, we need to talk about who that woman in the player's box actually is, because this is the part that most of the coverage glossed over in favor of the emotional footage. And it is the part without which none of the emotion makes any real sense. When Alex was 13 years old, she was offered a scholarship to train at a tennis academy in Mallorca, Spain. 13, old enough to understand what the opportunity meant. Young enough to have absolutely no framework for what uprooting your entire life to chase it would actually feel like. Thousands of miles from home, a country where the language was foreign, no friends, no family network, none of the invisible comforts that hold you together until they are gone. Most families in that situation make the pragmatic choice. They trust the academy, set up a communication schedule, promise to visit when they can. And that is not a failure of love. That is just the reality of what most people's lives allow. Alex's mother, Reza, decided her life was going to allow something different, regardless of the cost. She packed her bags, closed the door on everything she had built in Manila, and got on that plane. A new language to learn from scratch. A culture to navigate without a guidebook. Friends left behind. A career left behind. The entire architecture of the life she had constructed for herself, set down without visible hesitation because her 13-year-old daughter was going somewhere new, and she was not going to let her go alone. And here is the part that matters most about how Reza carried all of that. She never weaponized it. She never held it over Alex. She never let the sacrifice become a kind of debt that her daughter was quietly expected to repay through performance or gratitude, or the crushing weight of knowing what had been given up on her behalf. She just showed up, every single day. In whatever city the tour took them to, in whatever stadium was hosting that week's tournament, hands clasped, eyes on her daughter, never giving a single interview, never positioning herself to be part of the narrative, just the fixed point in a life that was constantly in motion, asking for absolutely nothing in return. So when Alex stood at the net of Court Suzanne Lenglen on that Tuesday afternoon in Paris, having just done something no Filipino tennis player had ever done before, and she looked over and saw her mother already falling apart in the front row of the player's box, she was not seeing someone surprised by the emotion of the moment. She was seeing someone who had been holding something for 7 years and had just run out of places to keep it. The walk across that court looked simple on camera, a few dozen feet, maybe 15 seconds. But watch Alex's face during it, and you will understand that it was one of the hardest distances she has ever covered. She was holding herself together by sheer will, trying to get to her mother before everything she had been keeping controlled for the duration of that match finally broke through. Reza was already standing by the time Alex reached the stairs. Her hands were trembling, and her face, the face of a woman who had spent years being the composed, invisible, quietly steady presence in the background, was completely unguarded. No composure left. No effort to manage how she looked or what the cameras might capture. Just a mother, raw and undone, watching her daughter climb toward her. Alex said one word. Mama. One word barely above a whisper, and Reza's arms were already open. The moment they reached each other, the stadium went silent. Not faded to quiet. Silent. Immediately, completely, reverently silent. 30,000 people who had been in full celebratory chaos 10 seconds earlier just stopped, all at once, because something in the air told them this was not the moment to make noise. The flags went still. The chanting dissolved. The commentators, who are professionally trained to always have something to say, said nothing. The camera zoomed in and the world watched as a daughter let herself come apart in her mother's arms for the first time after years of holding it together in public. If you watch closely enough, you can read what they said to each other in those first seconds. Reza, her voice barely making it out, says, "You did it. You did it, Anak." And Alex, her face buried so deep in her mother's shoulder that you almost cannot make it out, says something back that stopped 30 million people mid-scroll when they read the captions. "We did it, Mama. We did it together." Stay on that for a moment, because those two words, "we did it," are not a small thing. They are the entire story compressed into 4 syllables. Alex did not say, "I did it." She did not say any of the things a person might reasonably say in the aftermath of the biggest win of their career. She said "we," because in her understanding of everything that had led to this moment, the victory was never only hers to claim. Every training session her mother had driven her to. Every lonely night in a foreign country where Reza had been the one familiar thing in an unfamiliar world. Every match where Alex had wanted to stop and hadn't, partly because she could see her mother in the stands and couldn't make herself give up in front of her. Every doubt that Reza had quietly absorbed so that her daughter didn't have to carry it alone, all of that was in the room on that court in that moment. So of course, she said "we." The coaches and officials in the players' box gave them space without being asked. Other players who had gathered courtside turned their eyes away, not from indifference, but from the kind of instinctive respect that recognizes when something is too private to observe directly, even in a public place. When they finally separated, there were no words for a moment. Just Reza reaching up and taking her daughter's face in both hands, her thumbs moving across Alex's cheeks, saying something quiet and close that the cameras caught fragments of. "You're so strong. You're so beautiful. I'm so proud of you." And Alex, this 20-year-old who had just beaten the world number 2 on the biggest clay court stage in tennis, leaned into her mother's hands like a child, eyes closed. Like all she needed in that moment was to feel that her mother was right there and everything was okay. That image is the one that keeps cutting through, because it tells you something about Alex that the rankings and the results and the national hero coverage don't fully capture. Beneath all of it, beneath the competitiveness and the work ethic and the maturity that it takes to perform the way she performs on a court, she is someone who has never lost the thread back to where she came from. Someone who climbed as high as she has climbed, without forgetting who was standing at the bottom holding the rope. When they finally pulled apart, Alex walked to the microphone on the court. And what happened at that microphone is the part the internet has been replaying in 30-second clips, but which loses something important when compressed. So let me give you the full version. The tournament official handed her the microphone and her hand was visibly shaking as she took it. Her eyes were still wet. She started by apologizing, not for anything she had done, but because she was clearly fighting to stay composed and could feel herself losing that fight in real time. She said 2 words, "My mom," and then she stopped. Because how do you begin? How do you stand in front of 30,000 people with a microphone and a camera feeding your face to millions more and find language that is actually big enough for what you're trying to say? She looked back at Reza, still standing in the player's box, still crying, still watching her daughter with that same complete, unperformed, absolute love. And Alex found her way into it. She talked about the day they left Manila, about arriving in a country where she couldn't read a sign or order food without stumbling, about what her mother had walked away from to be there, the home, the friends, the career, the entire world Reza had made for herself before her daughter's dream became the thing that mattered most. And then she said the line that dropped the stadium into total silence. She never complained, not once, not when she was lonely, not when she missed her family, not when the language was impossible and the isolation was the kind that gets into your bones. She never once looked at me and let me feel like a burden. She just kept showing up because she believed in me when I was too young and too scared to fully believe in myself. You could hear the breath leave that stadium. Nobody was on their phone. Nobody was drifting toward the exit. 30,000 people from dozens of different countries were standing in complete stillness because a 20-year-old was telling a truth that crossed every border that usually divides us. Every time I want to stop, Alex continued, I think of her. Every time I feel like I have nothing left to give, I think about what she gave up, and then I find something. She paused. She looked directly at her mother, and she said, Mama, this win is not mine. It never was. Everything I have done and everything I am still going to do